Okay, so good morning, everybody. This class is for the Mi2 legal culture. Now we have a lot to catch up on, so this is for the group where we left off on travel contracts for very specific types of contracts. So we have looked at Europe and VAT. We've looked at sales contracts and the different things that you need to include in them. So what have we here with travel contracts? Well, what we're going to be looking at is predominantly airlines, hotels for both smaller and larger groups, and then getting into notions of liability. So if you are unaware, traveling in Europe is going to be much more consumer friendly than in the US. For example, as you can see, but on average in the EU, EU consumer tends to be better protected. Now, I've already talked to you about how airlines can oversell their seats and the reason why they do this. The reason why they do this is because, of course, they will think that someone is going to miss their flight, had too much to drink the night before, overslept, or what have you, family emergency. Now, one of the things that they're not allowed to do is purposefully miss their flight because that is against company policy. If they find that you have purposefully missed your flight in order to benefit from the lower price round trip ticket, they can legally charge you the difference in the airfare as well as penalties and fees. As I've mentioned before, if you are in a situation where there is overbooking and you can afford to miss the flight, do so. Volunteers will often will be given some form of voucher, some form of benefit for their next flight, maybe even upgrade service. Now, compensation. Compensation is a very interesting and unique thing for U.S. airlines in particular, because the question of being caught on the plane for too long, or the question of compensation, is usually only involved when we're talking about the tarmac. The tarmac is going to be that space which is when you are on the plane but the plane hasn't taken off yet. Normally, you're not allowed to get up, you can't get water, you can't get food. You are supposed to remain seated on the flight. Now, if the delay in the US is between 1 and 2 hours later than initially planned for a domestic flight, you are entitled to some form of compensation. But once more, that is only if you are on the tarmac. If it is an international flight where it's going to be up to 4 hours delay, then you are entitled to another level of compensation. You can see here up to $675 for domestic flight and up to $1,300 for international flights. Moving on now to the responsibility of a travel agency. Here, of course, travel agencies are in decline. Very few people of my generation or yours actually tend to use travel agents, but who knows? With everything going on with the coronavirus and all these cancellations coming through, maybe we will see a resurgence in travel agencies, because traditionally travel agents are going to be responsible for everything. Usually there is some level of insurance where if the trip is canceled for whatever reason, the travel agent will reimburse the customer. Of course, do not forget the importance of force majeure. In many of these cases that we're seeing now for these cancellations, this falls under force majeure. This is government decisions. This is a worldwide pandemic. Now, What is the responsibility of a travel agent? You can see here, they will book everything, airline tickets, accommodations, car rentals, etc. They can handle or manage any modifications or changes when needed. Usually, due to inside knowledge and because they have the right contacts, they can rebook a flight, which is difficult when you are a normal, regular citizen. And finally, of course, they will plan every detail of your trip from the time you leave to the time that you get back. So now we're going to move on to hotel contracts, and here I've highlighted groups. When I say groups, we're talking about conventions, we're talking about meetings, we're talking about perhaps conferences, things where you're going to be booking large sections of the hotel for whatever purpose. First and foremost, the requirement is that the hotel must meet any legal requirements for guests with disabilities. This, of course, we see all the time with bathrooms, hallways, and elevators. This means that simply that guests that need or that have disabilities must be accommodated. Attrition. Attrition is a unique term because attrition actually comes from war. Attrition is going to be the loss that you take even if you win. So for example, on the battlefield, you have the two sides going against one another. The winning side, of course, still lost soldiers, but they won. We refer to this as attrition. And in the hotel and tourism industry, attrition is a clause that can be added to a hotel contract that stipulates that the group that is booking the hotel rooms will have to pay a certain fine should the number of rooms decrease or not be fully used up. Because put yourself in the place of the hotel manager. They are the ones that have booked now perhaps 15, 20 rooms, and all of a sudden you tell them that you only need 10 rooms. Well, it is unlikely that they're going to be able to fill in those 5 rooms at last minute. Next, we have cancellation clauses. These are going to be stipulations that determine when, how long before you can cancel a reservation. It is recommended that you set up a lead time in terms of how many days before. Is it a half refund, full refund, no refund? And basically, you need to make sure the guests know what can they do, when can they cancel without facing any liability. The conditions of the premises, these premises meaning the location where the hotel actually is located, they need to be left in the same state that they were found. You know, we've all heard horror stories about musicians and actors and everything, what they do to hotel rooms when they kind of slash it, when they let themselves go wild. Dispute resolution. So dispute resolution is going to be a clause that you will see in hotel contracts where what happens if everything goes terribly wrong? What happens if the guests in the hotel have a major argument and they can't actually come to an agreement on anything? Well, this clause will be beneficial because it will stipulate any procedural rules, meaning how should this be handled? What should we do in case we disagree? Who and how the arbitrator will be selected. An arbitrator is going to be like a referee. They're not necessarily lawyers. They tend to be independent party members who will decide one way or the other which party is right. Of course, force majeure clause. This is what we're seeing now with the coronavirus. Liquor liability. Does your hotel and establishment have the right to sell liquor? Mitigation clause. So a mitigation clause simply means that there will be a specific formula used to calculate lost sales and what would need to be paid. So for example, if the guests destroy the hotel, if they ruin the walls, ruin the bathrooms, now renovations are going to be a need to be made. So during the renovations, that hotel room can't be used. So this mitigation clause is simply calculating, okay, so a room is normally 100 euros a night. It can't be used for 2 weeks. So now you have to calculate for the 2 week period, plus any types of damages that may have been done, especially, for example, regarding broken televisions, ripped sheets, anything like that. Unavailability of the facilities. What happens if the facility is no longer available for whatever reason? For example, as we're seeing now, with these hotels being converted for the homeless, they're being requisitioned for homeless purposes. Next, we're moving on to hotel contracts. Here now we're looking at more individuals and private groups. This is going to be probably less than 10 people, if you will. First and foremost, hotels need to be clean. Of course, making sure that the sheets and the towels are clean. It's not necessarily the duvet or the comforter. So one of the interesting questions is, so who has more power in a relationship between the hotel and its guests? Well, hotels will do most anything to avoid a bad review. So if a guest is adamant about something, or if the guest is constantly complaining about something, usually the hotel will give in. Now, we see this all the time with Yelp reviews and all these quote unquote influencers who are saying, well, if you let me stay at your hotel for free, if you let me eat in your restaurant, well, then I can give you a lot of free buzz. Thankfully, we're starting to see hotels and restaurants really fight back against that. And I'm very happy for it because, frankly, all these Instagram influencers are nothing but spoiled brats, if you want my honest opinion. Still, if the hotel feels that a guest has abused the hotel during their stay, they can hold a lien, Lien. I know it looks like lien, but it's a lien, which means simply that they can force a payment from the credit card. Or if they really want to play nasty, and if you really are finding a very difficult guest or someone staying at the hotel, you can technically hold their luggage hostage if they don't pay. When it comes to damages, so damages are going to be completely subjective and dependent upon the hotel as well as the guest in question. Damages, if it's for small things, usually the hotel will kind of let it go. We've all, stolen towels and whatnot. But if it's for larger things, we're talking broken televisions, stealing robes, broken plumbing. If it's a matter of completely staining the carpet or staining the sheets, then yes, the guest or the customer can be fully held liable, and they would have to pay for it. Now, what I'm going through here is what I went through with the other groups. You'll see that there's other information on these notes that I'm not necessarily talking about. If I'm not talking about it, it's not necessarily vital, but feel free to review these notes and study them on your own if you'd like, if you're interested in that type of thing. Next, we're going to move over to transport contracts and renting vehicles. So what happens if you want to rent a car? Well, here you can see that this portion is very limited because it all depends. Now, If you are going to the US and you want to rent a car, I don't recommend doing so before the age of 25. Usually there is a supplementary fee for younger drivers. If memory serves correct, you usually have 18 to 21 as one tranche d'âge, as one kind of category. Then you have 21 to 24, which is another, and then 25 and up. Now, keep in mind that if you are renting a car, the person renting the car is supposed to be the only person driving the car unless you add a secondary or tertiary driver. Keep in mind that that costs extra money. Now, one thing also, if you're renting a car and you're married, technically your spouse can drive the car even if you rented it in your name. It's understood as one of those marital rights that the couple may share. If you are not familiar with driving stick or driving manual cars, you will have a difficult time in Europe renting a car. Many car rental places only have a small handful of manual cars, and the ones, or sorry, automatic cars, and the ones that they do have are usually 200 to 300 euros more expensive than your manual cars. It is my high recommendation that should you ever rent a car for whatever reason, get the full insurance to cover yourself. Now, keep in mind that full insurance does not cover things like nicks and damages, does not cover things like broken windshields or broken windows. That you will have to pay out of pocket, unless, of course, you have some form of deal on your bank card or your credit card, which you'll be reimbursed. So now let's get into the good stuff. Let's take a look at hotel owner civil liability. So this means, when is a hotel owner going to be held civilly responsible, meaning that they can be sued for something that they did in the hotel or something that happened to a guest in the hotel. So what is liability? As we discussed previously, liability is going to be the state of being responsible for something, especially by law. So the question is a hotel responsible for crimes committed on their property? The short answer is, it depends. In the US, there are certain states where even if the crime was committed on the hotel site or on hotel property, the hotel is not necessarily legally liable. But that being said, a hotel can be held legally or partially liable if the courts determine that there wasn't sufficient or adequate measures put in place to protect the guest. So when then can the hotel owner be held liable? Well, here we can see these following scenarios. If the hotel owner knew that the situation was dangerous and didn't do anything to warn the guests, they can be held responsible. If the hotel owner didn't do what was necessary or adequate in making the hotel safe, then yes, they can be held responsible. Now, here's where we're getting into some really fuzzy areas, because you have to inform the guests of any potential dangers, but of course you don't want to scare them. Now, these types of warnings can be things like signs, they can be posters, they can be notices in the room, they can even be, of course, word of mouth. So I've mentioned these inadequate measures. When can a hotel officially be held responsible? So here we have Failure to anticipate crimes. Basically, when it comes to hotel liability, did the hotel do what was necessary, or as a rational person would deem necessary, in order to protect the guest? This could mean, did they have security cameras? Did they have gates? Do they have a safe? Do they have a key card system? Do they have a dual lock entry, meaning you have to put in a code in the first door and a key in the second? All of these different things can determine whether or not a hotel is going to be legally liable. So then what ends up happening if you are indeed held liable? Well, here we're getting into some indemnification procedures. In the case of injury, the guest maintains the burden of proof. This means that the guest has to prove that you did not do enough as the hotel owner to protect them. So that is going over what we needed to cover regarding travel contracts. I will, of course, include this notes for both groups so that way everyone can be on the same page. So hopefully this was clear for you. If you have any questions, we'll talk when we're all together on Thursday. So on Thursday, March 26th. So stay sane, stay safe, keep a head on your shoulder, and I hope to talk to you and see you soon. Goodbye, everybody.